There can be no doubt about his sex, despite the feminine appearance that every young man of the time aspires to. But when he,
that is, I,
came into the world, he was looking for something else.
I've never really thought of myself as a fan of period dramas. It's one of the things that the BBC has always been known for making, so I recall them being on TV all the time growing up, and I have this image in my head of them being really po-faced and slow, so it took an incredibly long amount of time for me to get round to watching Orlando.
I never thought of it as a historical film. I always thought it was a film about now that happened to go through 400 years.
The novel Orlando was written by Virginia Woolf and was composed as a faux biography of a poet who, without much explanation, lives for hundreds of years and at one point changes sex.
It's a loving look, a compassionate look at the confusion around what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman. I wanted to try and do it all through a sense of humour, in fact, and with a touch of lightness, so that people would be released through laughter back into themselves.
And although no one could call this a comedy, it was much more fun than I was expecting.
And then when I was working with Sally on developing this script, we kept thinking, how can we make it modern? Because the book is about the present moment. It's about history meaning nothing, gender meaning nothing. We'll get onto that in a second. Pretty much, nationhood meaning nothing. It's about the present moment, and it's about the real modern life. And we felt, we're going into the realm. This is about a rich person who's, back in time. That's big, no for in terms of relatability. That's going to be an issue. And we didn't want to be in the whole merchant ivory territory. How do we get the audience and keep them with Orlando? And so I said, well, what about this thing of talking to the audience? And we tried it, and we felt it worked. And it's it was hugely radical at the time, and I think it was very off-putting for a lot of people.
It would never have worked. A man must follow his heart.
Tilda Swinton plays the title character in both male and female incarnations. And being the first-class actor that she is, she doesn't overperform the male version of the character with a fake beard or an overly gruff manner. Orlando, though male, is played much closer towards androgynous.
The genius of Virginia Woolf as a writer, with this apparently light and playful tone, but in which she was dealing with very important philosophical issues. I mean, I was excited by that, and I was excited by this, as I keep saying, meditation on impermanence, something you can't grasp, you can't sort of hold. And of course, the in particular, what I thought was her portrait of the oppression of gender roles. So the struggles that men face, and I pushed that further. So being to the ultimate struggle of to kill or be killed in war has been predominantly a male, a thing that men have had to face, not women. Of course, there are some exceptions, but on the whole, that's the extremity of the destruction of men as cannon fodder. And then for women, the constraints, the performance of femaleness, that is a kind of form of both being lifted up onto a pedestal, trapped there, and diminished in real human terms, a kind of silencing and a making passive, or making you become an object in many, many different ways. So Virginia Woolf, described in her narrative lightly both of those forms of oppression.
But the Orlando character is not the only one to be portrayed by an actor of a different sex. The role of Queen Elizabeth I is played by writer and wit, but only occasional actor, Quentin Crisp.
Is this a worthy topic from one so clearly in the bloom of youth to one who would desire it still?
There's a famous quotation from Queen Elizabeth I about having the mind of a man and the body of a woman. And this is the way that women in powerful positions are often perceived. So it made sense at the beginning of the film to put somebody in the role of Queen Elizabeth I, who had himself devoted a lifetime to exploring the great question mark of gender. He has great dignity, one through his own suffering at the hands of establishment. It's funny, and he looks like Queen Elizabeth I.
I am aware that I live on what is oft referred to as Turf Island, where many people differ in opinion on the desire to transition being an affliction of the body or of the mind. But for the purposes of this video, I would like to remain neutral, as I don't believe anyone's opinion on what can happen in reality should affect their enjoyment of fiction. For example, I do not believe that time travel in anything other than a linear way is possible. I still enjoy Back to the Future. I do not believe in God or the devil, and I still think The Exorcist is a masterpiece of horror cinema. And I don't believe Daniel Craig can act. He somehow made a career from not reacting to explosions. But there are some of his films which are good. If you think someone changing from male to female is a step too far to you, then I would look upon this as an element of science fiction. Orlando is almost a Time Lord, living for centuries without aging a day before regenerating into a new form. Just relax your critical mind and buy into it for an hour and a half. And save those angry internet arguments for someone else's video.
Same person. No difference at all. Just a different sex.
Financiers and so on had terrible trouble imagining, and again and again and again said this can't work. You can't have one person do this and you'll never believe that they've really lived this long, and and so on and so forth. But I think the sense of the real is something that cinema does incredibly well with things that are in quotes not actually physically possible.
This movie is not driven so much by plot but by theme. It is separated into chapters, starting out with the Elizabethan era, where Orlando is gifted a castle and a large sum of money by the dying queen, and the young nobleman starts his life of privilege. Then we skip forwards to the Jacobean era, where Orlando falls in love with a Russian princess while still being engaged to someone else, but their romance ends abruptly when she returns to Russia. Then we find ourselves in the Restoration era. Orlando becomes the patron of a talented but impoverished poet, in the hope that he will help him with his own writing. But Orlando's poems are mocked and he gives up on the dream. Orlando is posted as the ambassador of Constantinople in the middle of the Ottoman Empire, where he is forced to fight to retain a good working relationship between their empire and the British. And it's at the end of this chapter that Orlando finds himself to be female, a fact that he, now she, accepts without surprise. The 18th century, or the Age of Enlightenment. Lady Orlando is celebrated for her beauty, but she has lost that which has been bequeathed to her, as women cannot inherit. To save her from destitution, she is proposed to by a nobleman, which she promptly declines. The Victorian era. Orlando meets a poet, who I believe reminds her of her former self. He is a handsome adventurer, and they fall madly in love, but his restless spirit causes him to leave. Then we're in the 20th century, starting out at one of the world wars, but moving forward to the 1990s. Orlando now has a daughter and she's written her story in a large book. The film ends with Orlando and her child happy together in a field. This film covers 400 years of world history in 90 minutes. Tell me again why superhero films have to be 3 hours?
It cost so little, we don't even know how much it cost, because so much of the budget was in rubles, which is a very, very clever idea, actually, when you're putting together this kind of budget. But way more than we could have imagined, but way less than any other films made now to this sort of scale. I would say it probably cost about $10 million.
This film is visually stunning. The lighting is rich and the lavish costumes give the impression that the period detail is much bigger than it actually is. If you look closely at any scene, you'll see that there are very few people in it. Even the battle in which Orlando is forced to fight in Constantinople is largely done with sound effects. Only one person climbs over the wall and they get promptly shot. These scenes on the frozen River Thames are probably only populated with about 30 people. Even the banquet at the beginning is relatively unpopulated, considering this meal was for the Queen. This film is really inventive with how it spent its money, and as a result looks much more expensive than it really was.
We're having a look, a recce, trying to see if we can squeeze some desert out of this scrubland. I think we're going to do that. Sally's behind me now, finalising her angles and shots. But I'm here really to find a place to dig a couple of pits, because I've pits for lavatories, That's my main concern, has been for the last 10 weeks, where the unit goes to the lavatory.
The budget was so tight that Sally Potter composed much of the soundtrack herself.
And the working process of making it, the music, informed, I think, also how it finally sounded, because it was in part an act of pure musical desperation. Towards the end of the edit, where money had run out, there wasn't a composer, I couldn't afford to use existing tracks, and so really it was about going into the studio and trying to record what I felt I could hear that was needed, and I started by doing that with my voice. So that sort of choir of all those kind of sounds that are happening, that's me multi-tracking my voice late at night at the end of a long editing day, basically, and then building up a lot of sounds around that.
I wish I could play the music here, but YouTube won't let me. Their house, their rules. So I urge you to find it on your music streaming platform of choice, as it has a strangely modern but also a period feeling to it. Also, bookending the film is the Scottish singer Jimmy Somerville from Bronski Beat and the Communards. He first appears as a singer on a boat, and then he reappears as a vision of an angel.
And this is just to go shopping in Tesco's. You should see what I wear when I go for dinner.
He's not as famous now as he was in 1992, but still serves as a welcome anachronism which seems to signpost to the audience that the film, while set in the past, is really about the present day.
But yes, the freshness of Orlando, it does feel even fresher now because I think that there were more films. I mean, I would like people to re-release a lot of work from that era, because I think that when you look at independent work from that era, it has a kind of... There was a possibility then, and Orlando was one of those films, and some of the Derek Jarman films also. I mean, the thing that I always tell younger people and students who weren't around then is that these were not... You know, if you, and we'll see what happens when Orlando is re-released next month, but if they were on primary release now, they would be in some cinematheque, or they would be...
Or a museum.
Film forum or in a museum.
Which brings up the issue of Sally Potter.
But the truth is that Orlando was a big, what they call crossover hit, and so were Derek Jarman's films. They were mainstream films then.
Orlando... Sorry. Orlando...
Orlando was a modest success when it was released in 1992, but it seems to continually find a new audience and popularity, for it would grow over the years, particularly in the present time, where matters of identity seem to be discussed ad nauseum. But some of the genius of this film is that it doesn't preach its message, but it dramatises it, and leaves just enough space for it to be open to interpretation.
I don't know, it was so interesting to me how poetry infuses every frame and every piece of dialogue. The way that the fourth wall is continually broken, those glances that Tilda Swinton gives to the camera, which are never glib, that are always kind of full of this entire person's existence and sense of being in this world and sharing that with us. It felt so generous and it felt so smart and funny. And I think I was just so captivated by Sally Potter's ability to make these paintings, these moving paintings. And I'd never seen that before. And it just completely cracked open for me what a film could be. And it sort of said the imagination is endless.
I hope it is clear from my enthusiasm for the film that I think it is excellent. Well acted, beautifully shot, and moves at a pace that so many turgid dramas could learn from. Tilda Swinton has gone on to become a big star, possibly even a national treasure, and has played male characters in both Constantine and Suspiria. Sally Potter has directed several other films, some of them rather good. I remember liking The Party a lot, but nothing she has made since seems to have had the resonance or acclaim of Orlando. But then, it is a tough act to follow.
Terrific play.
If you have enjoyed this video, then smash the like, share and subscribe buttons and tell your friends. I have plenty more videos in the works. If you're feeling generous and want to help me pay for the price of making these videos, you can send me the price of a cup of coffee via this site. And thanks in advance. I'm Scott Kingsnorth and I'm making a movie.